The name Michael Jackson doesn't just echo through music history, it defines it, a global icon, a cultural force, a once-in-a-generation phenomenon whose impact still shapes the sound, style, and spectacle of modern entertainment. But behind that brilliance stands a question that has quietly lingered for decades, a question that fans, critics, and even insiders have debated in whispers and headlines alike. Were his siblings ever truly as good as him? Because here's the truth most people don't talk about openly. The Jackson 5 didn't just produce one superstar. They produced multiple world-class performers, artists who, in another timeline, might have dominated the industry themselves, voices that filled arenas, talents that moved millions. And yet, only one became Michael Jackson. So what happened? Was it raw talent, timing, industry politics, or something far more complicated? Something shaped behind the scenes by pressure, ambition, and a father whose methods remain controversial to this day? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on one of music's most fascinating family legacies. This is not just a story about fame. It's about comparison, sacrifice, and the cost of greatness. Because the shocking truth might not be what you expect. To understand this story, you have to go back to Gary, Indiana in the 1960s. A working-class steel town where dreams didn't come easy. Inside a modest home on Jackson Street, a musical dynasty was quietly forming under the strict direction of Joe Jackson. Joe Jackson saw potential where others might have seen ordinary childhood. He pushed, demanded, and according to multiple accounts from family members over the years, enforced a level of discipline that blurred the line between training and trauma. The result? A group of young boys who could sing, dance, and perform with a precision far beyond their years. That group became the Jackson 5, featuring brothers Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and the youngest standout, Michael. From the moment they signed with Motown Records under the leadership of Berry Gordy, it was clear this wasn't just another act. Their early hits, I Want You Back, ABC, and I'll Be There, didn't just chart. They dominated, and at the center of it all was a child with a voice that defied age and expectation. Michael. But here's what often gets overlooked. Jermaine Jackson was initially positioned as the lead vocalist. Jackie had the maturity. Tito brought musicianship. Marlon contributed stage energy. Each brother had a role, each one essential to the group's chemistry. Still, something shifted. As the Jackson 5's fame exploded, so did the spotlight on Michael. His charisma wasn't just noticeable, it was undeniable. Audiences responded to him differently. Industry insiders noticed it. Executives leaned into it. And gradually, the group dynamic began to change. By the early 1970s, the Jackson 5 were no longer just a group, they were a phenomenon. But behind the scenes, tensions were growing. Creative control became a major issue, particularly with Motown, where artists had limited say over their music. This led to a pivotal moment in the family's career. In 1975, the group left Motown for Epic Records, a move that allowed them more artistic freedom. Jermaine, however, stayed behind due to contractual obligations and personal ties, leading to a lineup shift and a new name, the Jacksons. This era marked a turning point, not just for the group, but for Michael individually, because while the brothers continued to perform and release music together, Michael began stepping into a different lane. His solo work started gaining momentum, eventually culminating in albums like Off the Wall and later, the record-breaking Thriller. Thriller didn't just succeed, it redefined the industry. It became the best-selling album of all time. It shattered racial barriers on MTV. It elevated music videos into cinematic experiences. And in doing so, it created a gap between Michael and his siblings that was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Jermaine pursued a solo career of his own, scoring hits like Let's Get Serious. The Jacksons continued touring and recording. Tito would later explore blues. Randy joined the group during later years. but none reached the same level of global dominance. From a purely technical standpoint, music historians and industry experts often agree on one key point. The Jackson siblings were exceptionally talented. Vocally, Jermaine possessed a smooth, expressive tone that worked well in both lead and harmony. Jackie had control and consistency. Tito, while less prominent as a singer, was a skilled guitarist. Marlon's strength was performance. His dance ability and stage presence were critical to the group's energy. So why didn't any of them reach Michael's level? Experts point to several factors. First, uniqueness. Michael's voice had a rare emotional clarity. Even as a child, he could convey depth that resonated across age groups. As he matured, he developed a vocal style that was instantly recognizable. Second, innovation. Michael wasn't just performing music, he was reinventing how it was presented. From choreography to visual storytelling, he pushed boundaries consistently. Third, timing and opportunity. As the industry evolved, Michael was positioned both by talent and circumstance to take full advantage of emerging platforms like MTV. And finally, relentless perfectionism. According to collaborators and producers over the years, Michael demanded excellence at a level that few artists could sustain. That combination created something rare, not just a star, but a phenomenon. Even today, debates about the Jackson siblings continue to trend online. Some fans argue that Jermaine Jackson was underrated, pointing to his vocal strength and solo success. Others highlight the group dynamic, insisting that the Jackson Five's magic was a collective effort, not just Michael's brilliance. On platforms like Twitter and TikTok, younger audiences are rediscovering performances, often expressing surprise at how talented the entire group was. There's also a growing conversation about fairness. Was Michael's dominance a result of natural evolution, or did the industry, consciously or not, elevate him at the expense of his siblings? Opinions remain divided, but one thing is clear: the conversation isn't going away. As music continues to evolve, the legacy of the Jackson family remains deeply influential. Artists today, from pop superstars to R&B innovators, still draw inspiration from what the Jacksons created decades ago. There's also renewed interest in telling their story from multiple perspectives. Projects, documentaries, and biopics are increasingly exploring not just Michael's journey, but the entire family's experience. Because understanding the full picture means looking beyond the spotlight. It means recognizing that behind one of the greatest entertainers in history stood a family of extraordinary talent. At its core, this story isn't just about music. It's about brothers growing up in the same house, chasing the same dream, and watching one of them rise to a level the others couldn't reach. It's about pride, but also pressure, about shared success, but also individual struggles. In interviews over the years, members of the Jackson family have expressed both admiration and complexity when speaking about Michael. There's love, there's respect, but there are also layers of comparison, expectation, and identity. Because imagine this for a moment. How do you define your own legacy when your brother becomes the most famous entertainer on the planet? And now, we turn it over to you. Do you think Michael Jackson's siblings were just as talented, but overlooked? Or do you believe he truly stood on a level of his own? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation deserves more than a simple answer. To truly answer the question, were Michael Jackson's siblings as good as him, you have to slow down and examine each of them individually, because the reality is far more nuanced than a simple yes or no. This wasn't a family of average performers standing next to a genius. This was a family of elite-level entertainers, each shaped by the same environment, the same discipline, and the same relentless pursuit of excellence. Let's start with Jermaine Jackson. Jermaine was, in many ways, the original centerpiece. Before Michael's voice fully emerged as the defining force, Jermaine often carried lead vocals. His tone was smooth, controlled, and deeply rooted in classic soul traditions. Songs like I'll Be There showcased not just his technical ability, but emotional restraint, something that resonated strongly with adult audiences. Industry insiders at the time reportedly viewed Jermaine as the more conventional star, someone who could bridge generations and maintain long-term consistency. But here's where things get complicated. As Michael's voice evolved, it didn't just improve, it transformed into something unpredictable. Where Jermaine offered stability, Michael brought volatility, excitement, and emotional intensity. And in the entertainment industry, unpredictability often wins. Still, to suggest Jermaine wasn't capable of leading a major career would be inaccurate. His solo success in the late 1970s and early 1980s proved he had both the voice and the presence to stand alone. The difference wasn't talent, it was trajectory. Now consider Jackie Jackson. Jackie was the eldest performing brother, and his role was often understated. But insiders and longtime fans recognized something important about Jackie. He was the stabilizer. His vocals were clean, reliable, and essential to the group's harmonic structure. He didn't dominate songs, but he anchored them. In another era, Jackie might have thrived as a lead in a more traditional R&B group. But within the Jackson 5, where energy and charisma were escalating rapidly, subtlety became less visible. Then there's Tito Jackson. Tito's contribution was different and arguably just as critical. He was the instrumental backbone, the guitarist who added texture and depth to the group's sound. While he wasn't often in the spotlight vocally, his musicianship gave the Jacksons credibility beyond choreography and vocals. In later years, Tito would explore blues music, earning respect in a completely different lane, something that speaks to his versatility as an artist. Moving on to Marlon Jackson. Marlon might be one of the most underrated performers in the group's history. His dancing was explosive, sharp, and often synchronized perfectly with Michael's movements. In fact, in early performances, Marlon and Michael frequently mirrored each other, creating a visual dynamic that became a signature of the group. But here's the key distinction. While Marlon matched Michael physically, Michael added an emotional storytelling layer to his performance that audiences connected with on a deeper level. That intangible quality, often described as it factor, is difficult to measure, but impossible to ignore. And finally, we must acknowledge Randy Jackson, who joined the group later during the Epic Records era. Randy brought a different musical sensibility. He was a multi-instrumentalist with a strong understanding of songwriting and arrangement. His presence marked a shift toward a more mature, creatively independent version of the group. So when you step back and look at the full picture, one truth becomes clear. This was not a story of one talented individual surrounded by lesser performers. This was a story of extraordinary talent across the board, interrupted by the emergence of a once-in-a-century anomaly. No conversation about the Jackson family is complete without Janet Jackson, because if the question is whether any sibling came close to Michael's level of impact, Janet is the only name that consistently enters that conversation. Her rise wasn't immediate. In fact, early in her career, she struggled to define her identity outside of the family name. But everything changed with albums like Control and Rhythm Nation 1814, projects that didn't just succeed commercially but reshaped pop and R&B with bold themes, innovative production, and socially conscious messaging. Janet's artistry was deliberate, where Michael's brilliance often felt instinctive and explosive, Janet's felt calculated and evolving. She crafted her image, her sound, and her narrative with precision. And while she never surpassed Michael's global dominance, she achieved something equally significant in a different way. She built a legacy that stood independently of him. That alone is remarkable. No investigative look at this story can ignore the man behind the machine, Joe Axon's role in shaping his children's careers is both undeniable and deeply controversial. On one hand, he recognized potential early and pushed his children toward excellence with a focus and determination that few parents could replicate. Without that structure, it's possible the Jackson Five never would have reached Motown, never would have become a global phenomenon. But on the other hand, multiple family members, including Michael himself in past interviews,